After 4 weeks of deafness, I regained my hearing but didn't tell anyone. What my husband said to his mother will haunt you forever. I stood frozen by the oak staircase in our Denver home, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound of my husband's voice drifted from our granite kitchen, warm, familiar, the same voice that once whispered sweet promises. But the words coming out of his mouth? They belonged to a stranger. "I'm just exhausted from this charade, Mom," Blake said, his tone casual, almost relieved. "She's like dead weight now. Can't hear a single word, and honestly, it's peaceful." Dead weight. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I pressed my back against the cream-colored wall, holding my breath. According to everyone, including Blake, I was still completely deaf. For weeks ago, I couldn't hear my own heartbeat. But 3 days ago, everything changed. My hearing returned in a rush of overwhelming sound. And I hadn't told a soul. "Blake, darling, I told you from day one," his mother Dorothy's sharp voice cut through the air like broken glass. "She was never in your league. I begged you not to marry that girl." I squeezed my eyes shut. Dorothy had hugged me just 2 hours earlier in this very kitchen, brought me homemade chicken noodle soup, asked how I was feeling with fake concern dripping from her voice. "I know, Mom." Blake's heavy sigh carried frustration and something darker. "But I'm trapped now. Everyone would crucify me if I left her while she's like this. Like this. Like I was broken beyond repair." They believed I was still lost in silence, still trapped behind invisible walls. But I heard every poisonous word, and each one cut deeper than a knife. "You should have chosen Brittany when you had the chance," Blake muttered, and my stomach dropped to the floor. Brittany. I hadn't heard that name in 3 years. His ex-girlfriend who'd called me plain Jane at our engagement party. The same woman who'd flirted shamelessly with him at the Children's Hospital charity gala, right in front of me. He'd always sworn she meant nothing. Now I knew better. Dorothy's cold chuckle made my skin crawl. "Well, what about the inheritance? Has she signed anything yet?" My blood turned to ice. "What inheritance? What money?" Blake asked. "Her grandmother's estate, Blake." Dorothy snapped impatiently. "The Victorian house in Boulder, the land, that trust fund account. You said she hasn't touched a penny since the funeral. She's still drowning in grief. This is your golden opportunity." My mouth went bone dry. They were talking about Grandma Rose's inheritance. The beautiful Victorian house where I'd spent magical summers as a child. The trust fund she'd established when I turned 18. Money I'd refused to touch after she passed last spring because it felt too sacred, too final. And now they were scheming to steal it from me. Have you ever overheard something that shattered your world in an instant? Tell me in the comments what you'd do in Angela's shoes. Don't forget to hit that like button and follow for the next chapter. This story is just beginning. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I never imagined that silence could scream so loudly. It started with screeching tires and the smell of burning rubber. I just finished shopping at King Soopers on a crisp October afternoon, my arms full of groceries for Blake's favorite meal, grilled salmon with asparagus. A mountain biker came flying around the parking lot corner like he was in the Tour de France, and I jumped back so fast my feet went out from under me. My head cracked against the concrete curb with a sound I'll never forget, the last sound I heard for 4 weeks. I woke up in Denver Presbyterian Hospital, blinking against fluorescent lights that felt like needles in my eyes. Blake's face hovered above me, his mouth moving frantically, but I couldn't hear a whisper. Not his voice, not the beeping machines, not even my own terrified breathing. Complete silence had swallowed my world whole. Dr. Rodriguez called it sudden sensory neural hearing loss. Through careful lip reading and Blake's frantic note-taking, I learned it might take days, weeks, maybe months to return, if it ever did. I watched the doctor's mustache move as he explained my condition to Blake like I wasn't even there. Blake squeezed my hand, his mouth forming words I couldn't understand without staring directly at his lips. I nodded, pretending to grasp everything, but inside I was drowning in fear. Those first days at home felt like living underwater. Everything became about survival, learning to read lips, communicating with hand gestures, pointing at things like a lost tourist. Blake downloaded a speech-to-text app on his iPhone. He even left sweet sticky notes around our Highlands neighborhood house. "I love you" on my bathroom mirror, "You're stronger than you know" on the coffee maker. At first, I clung to those small kindnesses like life preservers. I told myself we'd weather this storm together, that love would be enough. But slowly, like ice forming on a lake, things began to change. The sticky notes disappeared first. Then Blake stopped using the transcription app, claiming it was too slow. When I'd tap his shoulder for clarification, he'd sigh like I'd interrupted something important. Eye contact became rare, replaced by distracted glances over my head. I remember one evening vividly. I walked into our living room and caught Blake on his cell phone. He didn't notice me standing in the doorway. He was pacing back and forth, grinning, laughing silently at whatever the person was saying. His whole face was alive, animated in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. The moment he spotted me, everything shifted. The smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. His lips moved quickly, "Just work stuff, honey." Then he brushed past me into the kitchen without another glance. Work stuff didn't make him light up like Christmas morning. Work calls didn't make his shoulders relax or put that spark in his green eyes. Someone else was making my husband happy, and it wasn't me. There were more moments like that, cold, cutting moments that felt like paper cuts to the soul. Blake would bring me dinner and set it down without explanation. No note, no smile, just food and silence stretching between us like a chasm. Then Dorothy arrived like a storm cloud on our doorstep. Dorothy Morrison swept into our house one gray November morning carrying white roses and wearing a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She kissed my cheek with lips that felt cold as winter, and I signed thank you though I wasn't sure she understood, or cared. She positioned herself on our leather couch like she owned it and began talking. Not to me, mind you, about me. Her lips moved rapidly, her hands folded primly in her lap, barely acknowledging my existence. I focused hard, reading every word. She doesn't even realize how lucky she is. Blake could have married someone with real potential. She smiled sweetly at me like she just complimented my hair. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. Dorothy thought silence meant stupidity. She had no idea I was watching, learning, remembering every cruel word. Later that afternoon, Blake left to pick up Thai food from our favorite restaurant on South Broadway. Dorothy stayed behind, pacing our hardwood floors like a caged animal. She spoke under her breath, assuming I couldn't follow her movements or read her lips. But I caught enough. She'll never see this coming. Blake just needs to play the devoted husband, and she'll hand over everything. She always does what he wants. My blood chilled. Hand over what? What were they planning? That night, I started a journal. Hidden in my nightstand drawer, I wrote down every suspicious glance, every half-caught conversation, every moment that felt wrong. Even if I wasn't sure what it all meant, I needed evidence. I needed proof I wasn't losing my mind. Blake seemed different too, distracted, almost guilty. He'd started taking his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. Before my accident, he'd leave it charging on the kitchen counter without a care. Now it lived in his pocket like a secret he had to protect. One evening, I walked into our living room to find him deep in conversation, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice me at first, his eyebrows raised, that genuine smile stretching across his face again. I stood in the shadows, reading his lips. I missed that laugh. No, she has no idea. When he finally saw me lurking in the doorway, he flinched like I'd caught him stealing. The smile died instantly, replaced by his new default expression, polite, distant, fake. Just my buddy Jake from college, he mouthed slowly. I nodded, but inside I was screaming. Jake didn't make Blake's eyes dance like that. Jake didn't make him sneak phone calls or hide his screen when I walked by. The entries in my hidden journal grew longer each day. Tuesday, Blake came home smelling like vanilla perfume. I don't wear vanilla. Friday, Dorothy called me pathetic under her breath while making coffee. Smiled at me right after. Sunday, Blake sat in his truck for 30 minutes before coming inside, talking on phone. Laughing. Each observation felt like a splinter under my skin. Not enough to destroy me, but enough to remind me that something was very, very wrong. I tried desperately to find pieces of the old Blake, the man who'd dance with me in our kitchen to songs only he could hear, who'd rub my shoulders during my teaching job stress, who'd called me his whole world on our wedding day 3 years ago. But that man had vanished the day I lost my hearing. And even though I couldn't hear it yet, I felt the silence between us growing louder every single day. Dorothy announced she was staying for a full week like she was doing us a tremendous favor. She swept through our house in designer clothes and expensive perfume, treating me like furniture that happened to be in her way. During the day, when Blake was at his accounting firm downtown, Dorothy dropped her sweet act completely. She'd sit beside me on the couch, turn her head away, and speak in that soft, mocking tone she'd perfected. "If I were in your pathetic situation, I'd be ashamed," her lips moved deliberately. "Keeping my son trapped like this when you can't contribute anything meaningful to this marriage." She'd sip her coffee and continue, "He only married you out of pity, you know. I told him that before your little wedding at the Botanic Gardens." I sat perfectly still, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something was breaking while something stronger was being forged. That Thursday night, Blake and Dorothy disappeared into his home office and shut the door. I waited in the hallway around the corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Through the crack between the door and frame, I could see them hunched over Blake's mahogany desk. Dorothy's face was twisted with impatience, while Blake paced like a caged tiger. And there, spread across the desk, were papers with my name at the top. I couldn't make out every word from their frantic lip movements, but I caught the important ones: sign, transfer, power of attorney. Blake tapped the documents repeatedly, while Dorothy gestured wildly, her mouth forming the same word over and over: now, now, now. What were they trying to get me to sign? What documents required my signature so desperately? I backed away before they could spot me and hurried to the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping since the accident. My hands shook as I closed the door and leaned against it. They were definitely planning something. Something they thought my deafness would prevent me from understanding or stopping. But I wasn't going to stay in the dark much longer. 2 days later, everything changed again. I sat in Dr. Rodriguez's office at the Denver Yenti Clinic, watching his lips carefully as he delivered the news I'd been praying for since October. "Your hearing has returned completely," he said, his mustache twitching with genuine happiness. "It's remarkable, really. Sometimes the brain just needs time to heal itself." Tears filled my eyes as sounds rushed back into my world: the hum of the air conditioner, papers rustling, his pen clicking against his clipboard. It was overwhelming and beautiful, like coming back from the dead. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward with kind eyes. "You can surprise your husband now. He'll be over the moon." I smiled and nodded, but something deep in my chest remained perfectly still. Not joy, not relief, just cold, calculating calm. I didn't tell Blake. I didn't tell anyone. I drove home from the medical center in complete silence, my hands steady on the wheel of my Honda Civic. I moved through our house like a ghost, pretending I still lived behind glass walls. But now I was listening. Really, truly listening. And what I heard in the next 24 hours would destroy everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. It happened the very next morning. Dorothy was in our kitchen slicing strawberries like she owned the place, wearing Blake's old University of Colorado sweatshirt. Blake leaned against our granite counter in his gray pajamas, holding his favorite Denver Broncos coffee mug. Neither of them saw me standing in the hallway shadows. They had no idea I could hear every single word. "I'm tired of dragging this charade out," Dorothy whispered, her voice dripping with impatience. "Just get her to sign the transfer papers, the house, the trust account, everything. You're her husband. She'll do whatever you ask." Blake didn't respond immediately. He set down his mug and rubbed his temples like this conversation was giving him a headache. "I've been trying," he finally said. "She trusts me completely, but I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending to be the loving husband." Pretending. The word hit me like a physical blow. Every kiss, every hug, every "I love you" since my accident, all of it had been an act. "She's too naive to suspect anything," Dorothy continued, her voice getting more animated. "Especially now. What's she going to do? Call you out? Hire a lawyer? She can't even hear herself think." Blake actually laughed. A quiet, cruel sound I'd never heard from him before. "Yeah, it's definitely easier this way," he agreed. "She doesn't interrupt, doesn't ask questions, doesn't demand attention every 5 minutes. I hate to admit it, but being married to her like this, it's almost convenient." My legs nearly gave out. I pressed my back against the wall to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just about Grandma Rose's money anymore. This was about everything: our entire marriage, our whole relationship, the man I thought loved me unconditionally. "You know," Blake continued, his voice getting dreamy. "Sometimes I wonder what life would be like with Brittany. She never would have needed me to take care of her like this." Dorothy made a disgusted sound. "Brittany also wouldn't have given you access to $1 million trust fund." He didn't argue with that assessment. I waited for something, anything, that sounded like the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health. Some small defense of me, some tiny indication that I meant more to him than dollar signs and convenience. Instead, he said the words that burned themselves into my soul forever. "Honestly, if she never gets her hearing back, I won't lose any sleep over it." My mouth fell open in shock. The man I'd loved with my whole heart didn't want me to heal. He wanted me to stay broken, dependent, controllable. I had to cover my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. My foot knocked against our side table, making a tiny scraping sound against the hardwood floor. Dorothy's head snapped toward the hallway. "Did she hear that?" she whispered urgently. Blake followed her gaze and shrugged. "She can't hear anything. Probably just wandering around again like she does." I ducked into our laundry room and pressed myself against the washing machine, my whole body trembling with rage and heartbreak. For 4 weeks, I'd believed in him. Even in silence, even in isolation, I'd held on to faith that Blake Morrison loved me for better or worse. Now I knew the devastating truth. He loved the version of me that couldn't fight back. But he had no idea that Angela was back, fully, completely, and listening to every word. For the next 2 days, I became the greatest actress in Colorado. I smiled when Blake kissed my forehead before work. I nodded gratefully when Dorothy brought me herbal tea. I played the part of the helpless, dependent wife while my brain worked overtime, planning every detail of what came next. They thought I was still that fragile woman who needed someone to write things down, hold her hand in crowded places, explain simple situations. But that version of Angela died the moment I heard Blake say he preferred me broken. I waited until they left together for the grocery store. Dorothy was helping now, which really meant controlling every aspect of our household. The second their car disappeared around the corner, I locked the door and ran upstairs to our bedroom. My hands shook as I opened the safe hidden in our walk-in closet. Grandma Rose had given me the combination years ago, making me promise to remember it always. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at since her funeral, property deeds, bank statements, her detailed will. She hadn't left everything to me out of favoritism. She'd done it because she saw something in Blake that I'd been too blind to recognize. Grandma Rose had always been an excellent judge of character, and she'd known he was too smooth, too charming, too calculating to be trusted with her life's work. With trembling fingers, I photographed every single document. I uploaded them to a secure cloud folder, emailed copies to my old attorney, and sent another set to a new lawyer I'd researched online, Rebecca Chen from Chen & Associates, a firm known for taking down manipulative spouses. Then I pulled out my secret weapon, the tiny digital recorder I'd bought the day after my hearing returned. I'd kept it in my robe pocket ever since, always recording, always ready. I played back their conversation from that morning, Blake's voice crystal clear. "If she never gets her hearing back, I won't lose any sleep over it." Dorothy's voice, "She's too naive to suspect anything." Every cruel word, preserved forever. Click. Save. Upload. Backup 3 separate ways. They had no idea I'd been gathering evidence. They had no idea I could fight back. That evening, I cooked their favorite meal, homemade lasagna with garlic bread from a recipe Blake's Italian grandmother had taught me. I lit candles, opened a bottle of Chianti, and smiled like nothing in the world had changed. Dorothy laughed over her wine, tossing her silver hair dramatically. "Angela, sweetie, you really should consider seeing someone about your condition. It's such a tragedy to live like this." I nodded slowly, cutting my lasagna. "I will when I'm ready." Blake raised his glass in a mock toast. "You're the strongest woman I know. You'll get through this." I looked at him across the flickering candlelight, studying the face I'd once loved more than anything. Now I saw a complete stranger, a man who'd held me while I cried after Grandma's funeral, who was now scheming to steal her house. A man who'd once memorized my favorite songs, who now found me easier to love in silence. After dinner, while they watched Netflix in the living room, I made final preparations. I booked a room at the Ritz-Carlton downtown under my maiden name, paid in cash. I packed a small suitcase and hid it under our guest bed. Rebecca Chen called me back within hours. She'd reviewed all my files. "Your case is absolutely bulletproof," she told me, her voice sharp and confident. "You're not just going to get justice, Angela. You're going to get everything." I stared out our bedroom window at Grandma Rose's garden that Blake never bothered to water. The broken bird bath she'd installed when I was 12. The oak tree we'd planted together when I graduated college. He wanted to steal the house where I'd learned to bake cookies, where I'd hidden Easter eggs, where I'd said goodbye to the woman who'd raised me after my parents died. Over my dead body. That night, I stood at the foot of our bed watching Blake sleep peacefully beside Dorothy, who decided to stay in our guest room indefinitely. No guilt shadowed his face, no shame disturbed his dreams. Just smug satisfaction that his plan was working perfectly. They had no idea that the deaf woman down the hall could hear every snore, every whisper, every movement. Tomorrow, the performance would end. Tomorrow, Angela Morrison would finally speak. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Dorothy was already gone when I woke, probably meeting with Blake's attorney about those forged documents. Blake sat in our kitchen reading the Denver Post on his tablet, sipping coffee from his lucky mug like it was any other Tuesday. He didn't even glance up when I walked in. "Morning," I signed out of habit. He gave me his practiced smile, the fake one I now recognized. "Morning, sweetheart." I sat across from him at our breakfast table, my heart hammering but my hands steady. The morning light streaming through our windows felt different today. Sharper. More real. Blake folded his tablet and looked up absently. "You seem different today. Everything okay?" I opened my mouth and spoke the words that stopped time itself. "I heard everything." Blake's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. His face went completely blank, like someone had erased his expression with a cloth. For 10 seconds, neither of us moved or breathed. "What?" he whispered. "I got my hearing back a week ago," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I couldn't hear you. And now I know exactly who Blake Morrison is." He set down his mug with shaking hands. "Angela, listen." "No, you listen," I snapped, pulling out my phone. "I heard you tell Dorothy you preferred me deaf. I heard you planning to steal my grandmother's inheritance. I heard every single lie." I pressed play on my recording app. His voice filled our kitchen like poison. "If she never gets her hearing back, I won't lose any sleep over it. She's too naive to suspect anything. It's convenient having her like this." Blake went white as fresh snow. You recorded me?" "Every word," I said calmly. "It's all ready with my lawyer, along with copies of Grandma's will, the trust documents, and evidence of your fraud attempts." He sank back in his chair like my words had physically knocked him down. "You don't understand," he stammered. "I never meant to hurt you." "You already did," I said softly. "The moment you decided I was worth more broken than whole." Right then, our front door opened. Dorothy waltzed in carrying Starbucks and wearing a victorious smile that vanished the second she saw our faces. "What's going on?" she demanded. "I know," I said simply. "I know everything." "She's bluffing," Dorothy snapped, but uncertainty crept into her voice. I played the recording again. Her voice joined Blake's in their conspiracy. "She's too naive to suspect anything. Just get her to sign the transfer papers." Dorothy's expensive coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on our tile floor. "You manipulative little." "Careful," I warned, standing up. "Everything's been documented. If either of you comes near me or my property after today, I'll have restraining orders filed so fast your heads will spin." They stared at me like I'd transformed into someone completely different. And I had. I walked upstairs and pulled my suitcase from under the guest bed. On my way back down, I stopped in front of our wedding photo hanging in the hallway. 3 years ago, Blake had looked at me like I was his whole world. Now I knew better. I left the picture on the wall. Let it remind him of what he threw away. Blake followed me onto our front porch, desperation replacing his usual confidence. "Angela, please," he begged. "We can work through this. I made mistakes, but I love you." "No," I said, staring into his green eyes one last time. "You loved the quiet. You loved the control. But you never loved me." A black sedan waited at the curb. Rebecca Chin had sent it. As I walked toward my new life, Blake called out behind me. "Where will you go? What will you do?" I turned back with a smile that felt like sunshine after a storm. I'm going to live, Blake. Something I forgot how to do while I was married to you. The car door closed with a soft click. As we pulled away from the house where I'd lost myself, then found someone so much stronger, I felt truly free for the first time in years. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. The woman who'd stayed silent while the world plotted against her was gone forever. Angela Morrison was just getting started.